Honestly, some of the smartest people that I've ever had in my career, they have failed the interview at Meta. I want to caution everybody about red flags as part of an interview process.
These are the top 3 things that you should definitely have on your resume when you are applying to any top tech.
I think that the interview process at Meta is really, really difficult. And the difference when you go, the difference between an expert and a master, expert can do it at the expert level, a master can teach at that expert level.
I did not pay enough attention to was where am I going to intern, right?
Whatever those negative behaviors are, if you tolerate it, then that is your culture.
Hello everyone, welcome to Curious Souls. My name is Ankita Mishra. I'm a senior product manager at Microsoft, and thank you so much for coming to our channel and listening to our podcasts. Our channel is all because of all of you, and if you really like our podcast, like our content, like our speakers and guests, please hit that subscribe button right now. It really helps us to get fabulous leaders all over the industry, whether it's tech, finance, fitness, on this podcast. And talking about today's guest, he's a phenomenal leader who has worked in Microsoft and then Meta, but I will pass it on to Rishab because he's the main guy to introduce the guest for today.
Absolutely.
So over to you, Rishab.
Thank you, Ankita. So today we have Brian Ellis. I'm super excited to have him on the show. I cannot even begin introducing him. He's done a great work in this area. He gave me my first shot at PM journey, first shot at Microsoft. I've learned so much from him, how to be an empathetic leader, how to be customer centric, how to think about the team, and how to grow yourself from early in career to a product leader. So I'm so excited because you guys are going to learn so much from him today. And over to you, Brian. Drum rolls. Please introduce yourself.
Oh my goodness, that's quite an introduction and lead, and I hope I can live up to it. Hello, glad to be here. My name's Brian Ellis. I've been in the industry for 20 plus years. I can say 20 plus because the first 20 were at one company. So I spent the first formative part of my development at Microsoft. I had the opportunity to do a dozen different jobs while I was at one company because at that time, Microsoft had, quite the interesting reputation of a lot of different competition internally. And then as I grew in my career, I got a lot of different opportunities to try on different disciplines and roles. And then I got an opportunity to leave Microsoft and go to a startup experience. Wow. So I got a couple of years doing startups. I was able to join a Series C company with a big title and a big role. We had just raised $500 million, and it was incredibly exciting to go through the process of how do you take the product that has earned investor trust and now convert it into something that actually earns customer trust. And then I wound up having the opportunity to then do a pre-funding startup as well. The best part of that is that I got to do it with somebody who was also at Microsoft before. So he had also departed Microsoft. The two of us got connected, and then we were able to then start building up this new company. And then I got the opportunity to come and join Meta, which is where I'm at today in a director of engineering role. I've had a blast being able to be here for the last several years. So happy to talk about wherever is the most interesting part for your audience.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Brian. I think one question we keep on getting on LinkedIn, on our Instagram channel is they want to learn, our audience wants to learn, how is it to work at Meta versus how is it working at Microsoft and things of that nature. So, it'll be fun if you can give us from your personal experience, your insights, fun things that you have, been able to at Meta. So please.
Day in a life of Brian Ellis.
Oh, we would love that. I love that tagline.
You do not want the day in my life today. But I get that question a lot because it's one of those things when you get a chance to do a lot of interviews, you get a chance to meet people that are trying to find where do they want to be. Because generally they're not just interviewing at Microsoft or interviewing at Meta. Right. They're interviewing at Amazon. They're interviewing at many of the other, top industry companies. So it's fascinating to be able to get a chance to chat with people. But to that specific question, I found when I was at Microsoft, it was very competitive by default. And there's something really powerful about that when you have two teams that are given the opportunity to compete to see who can actually solve the business problem for the customer first. It creates an interesting dynamic where the opportunity to share might become minimized because you might give your competitor an advantage. Versus at Meta, it's pretty significantly different where it's mostly about the collaborative opportunity. Now, before I go too much further, I do want to say I love Microsoft. I'd go to work to Microsoft again tomorrow. It's one of my favorite companies. I grew up around this area, so I've admired Microsoft forever. So I don't mean this in any way to be like disparaging for Microsoft. It was just at the time that I was there, which was more than 5 years ago, the culture had that dominance of the competitive nature, which I still think is incredibly valuable. But at Meta, like I said, the collaborative is the default expectation that we start with. Yeah. So, the mission for Meta is how can we connect people across the globe? And being able to, engage in that mission for the company requires us to actually, behave that way as a company. Right. And the scale of the operation that we're working in, if you don't actually take time to visit with the folks that are building the products with you, or that are your dependent teams that you're then working with to solve a business problem for a customer, you're missing out. You maybe get 20% of the understanding from, those dependencies you have to actually solve the customer problem, versus if you spend time with them, they actually then become that they care about your business problems, and they start trying to figure out how can they also help you as well. So as much as, my organization has a pretty significant role at the company, being able to actually ask others for help is a necessary part of it. And at Meta, asking for that type of help and collaborating on bigger goals is actually a really big deal. One other story that might be fun is, so obviously I joined about 4 years ago, and one of the things that every company has to figure out is how do you do performance management and, the review cycle and all that fun stuff. Yeah. So the first time that I attended a review process, I wasn't accountable for like choosing the outcomes because I was too new to be able to actually decide who should get a good grade or whatever. But the thing that amazed me is as we were going through the conversation, we were looking at individual people's, results, and it's referred to as a packet. And the investment was actually sharing credit was marked in the packet. So instead of saying Rishab accomplished something, it said Rishab was responsible for 40% of this impact, but he collaborated with Ankita on this part of it. And it was really fascinating to see how, it wasn't just a slogan about, we want to work and empower with others. It was, a measurement. It's actually part of how we try to encourage and incentivize folks to collaborate by default instead of compete by default. So that's, kind of a long answer of the significant difference there.
I think I love this, right? The collaboration piece. And I think I have a few friends working at Meta, but I've never actually had the opportunity to sit down and learn this about Meta, that, how deeply they are affected or care about collaboration, and that speaks volume when you are able to do that in a team of this large scale. So this is something really great that we learned today, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start with, it's an honor to have you here, Brian. I've heard so much about him. I was just telling him before we started this podcast that I've been hearing about him since 2019.
2017.
2017,
Oh
yes.
my.
Actually, 2018 when I came for my internship. Yes. And finally, I have the honor to see him, meet him in person and interview him. So I think one of the things that definitely our audience or somebody in millennial, Gen Z generation, or anybody not attaching an age or a generation to it can gain is today's market is so competitive, right? I mean, with every new technology, AI coming into the picture, ChatGPT, Google just announcing its new LM model, Notebook LM, right? With the podcast AI coming into picture. I think it's very difficult for people to get up to date. And when you're on the other side of the table, right? You are an engineering lead, you're a product lead. When you interview a candidate, what are the top 3 skills or something on the resume that you look up to and that you would suggest to the audience that, hey, these are the top 3 things that you should definitely have on your resume when you are applying to any top tech, right? The FAANG and Microsoft or any other company.
I mean, that's a really huge question because there's so much to it. I think part of it is, you're going to have your career experience at different levels. So if you're coming out of college, there's absolutely an expectation of how well and how deep are you in your principal focus, your major. How much are you then demonstrating impact inside of that major? And then we look for internships and other experiences outside of just the college path to then demonstrate, commitment beyond the grade. So being able to, come into work at the right time, get the impact that you've been able to deliver for individual companies, that's really powerful to see. And it's actually one of those things where I don't know if people spend enough time on choosing where they do their internships, because as a college student, you should be pretty passionate about finding a great college internship opportunity. Right. Waterloo is one of those fantastic schools that actually sponsors and encourages internships as part of the system. I'll also advise anybody who's in college and isn't already considering where they're interning in their top tech companies, figure it out fast, because one of the magic things at Meta, we can actually compare. I was telling Rishab how much I'm still data obsessed. I've been data obsessed for my career. I expect it for folks that I work with. They should become data obsessed. The data actually shows the difference between somebody who's been a returning intern at Meta and is hired versus somebody who comes fresh from the industry. Maybe they've got 5 years in the industry and then they join Meta. The performance acceleration is radical for starting as an intern. It's just amazing how much you learn, like the basics, like where's the bathroom is just like the kind of joke about, how do I figure out how to check in code? How do I figure out how to do a review? How do I figure out all those basics? As an intern, you figure all those things out because you get that very intense, deep work ethic that you have to go and solve. And then you get that opportunity as a returning intern to then basically accelerate, as you're basically cheating. You're getting a head start ahead of your competitors. So that's, early in your career. Once you start maturing into your career, I think that there's a lot of things that we look for. I think that the interview process at Meta is really, really difficult. It's one of those things where, for me personally, many years in the industry, obviously more than 20 years, and I actually studied for a couple of weeks before my interview. I actually learned Python with my son because he's a computer science passionate guy. So getting the opportunity to have fun with him and just learn a programming language, that was a great chance to just, dust off the rust in my career and get back to like the actual hardcore of, writing code. And so I encourage anybody who wants to go through the Meta process. It's quite an intense interview process, and you should feel pretty satisfied of actually finishing the process, as well as obviously if you get the offer, that's fantastic. It was kind of a highlight for me just to say that I earned that. And then on the other side of it, the things that we are looking for, we have a very specific methodology about how we do the interviews, because there is the expectation that you should have your core technical. There is the expectation you should have some of the oral and written communication capability and the ability to express that. And then as you get more senior, we're starting to test you for what's your judgment. What are your experiences then lead into how you then describe choices and tough decisions you've made. There's a lot of decisions that are very obvious. I call them the 90-10s. 90% of the time you're going to be right just by going this direction. And so it's very easy to figure out, oh yeah, we should go this way. Simple. Versus those 50-50 choices where it's 49.9 to 50.1, and it's really hard. So that's the fascinating part when you ask that question, tell me about a difficult decision that you've had to make. And somebody talks about potentially the scale of the outcome as being the representation of difficulty versus, well, here's the adversarial challenge we had from a customer relationship, or here is the competing ideas that we had. We could solve it with this technology and it would take us 6 months longer, or compromise and launch with this much technical debt. And like you can see like their brain thinking through that and then being able to describe the lessons. So at the more senior levels, you are starting to get into what's their judgment, what's that experience, how can they speak effectively and intelligently about having to make those really, really tough trade-off calls.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. That was very detailed and that was very helpful. I love how you broke it into like early in career, fresh out of college, mid and senior, because that's going to help a lot, because there's no one size fits bullet, right? You have to have different expectations, and the way you prepare is going to be different at different stages, right? And I think one point that you made, which I think if I go back to my college days, I did not like pay enough attention to, was where am I going to intern, right? During those days when you're in college, you're like, if I'm going to get internship in some company, and that's fine. I can figure out where I want to go in full time. This is just my opportunity to test what I like and what I don't like. But if I firsthand saw people who were interning at Microsoft in the same team, when they came back as full-time, way ahead of me in so many things, right? They understood the lay of the land better. They understood like the technology, the behind the scenes, and even logistics, like, how do you work with the payroll, HR team, and what have you. So all of those things that they culminate together to make you successful quickly, versus person who comes in and tries to understand the, how does a company like Meta or Microsoft works. So I think that's really helpful, and I cannot stress enough on that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
A couple other things, just from an interviewing process expectations perspective, I want to caution everybody about red flags as part of an interview process.
Okay.
It's one of those things where you can never fully understand or, get inside of a person's head in a 45-minute or an hour-long interview. It's really hard. So there's all kinds of things that, for the interviewer, you have to kind of do your best assessment and best judgment. But there are things that stand out as very much red flags. So for anybody in this world where you do a lot of Zoom interviews and other things like that, it is one of those expectations that you are putting your best self forward and being honest with high integrity about how you do your interview,
Right.
as opposed to, looking off screen and doing other types of behaviors that can demonstrate a cheating type of a
Got
perspective.
it.
So
Good point.
there are those things that pop up. And this was true when I was at Microsoft. My role at Microsoft, after a certain number of years, you get a role that I don't think they have anymore called as appropriate, where the goal of that interview was to qualify two things. One was the values of the candidate. So making sure that they have the right kind of integrity, the right kind of mindset, that they're actually going to be successful at the company. And the second one is that they have a career opportunity at the company, as opposed to they'll fill a need for a hiring manager. So we didn't want to hire people that then within 2 years they had reached their maximum. And it's not necessarily an easy and obvious question and interview process, but it does come back to, on that first part, is the integrity question. And there are those things that are red flags in interviews where it becomes very obvious that you are doing something of low integrity and it's showing up, and that'll disqualify you very, very quickly. So I'd much rather, for anybody who's watching this, to spend the time to study and prepare. Honestly, some of the smartest people that I've ever had in my career, they have failed the interview at Meta, and they've failed at other companies as well. But part of that is a representation of the preparation part of it. Part of it also is you can't get around the need to be yourself and be honest.
Yeah.
Take a run, miss, come back again and get it right, as
Yeah.
opposed to do anything that's, one of those ways that you think you might be able to short circuit the system.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately it does happen that we do have potentially great people that try to oversell themselves, or they don't necessarily show up with high integrity. And that actually becomes one of those things where, we're very passionate about the culture we have at the company. And we do not want to have that culture where you look for shortcuts instead of looking for long term. There's a lot of that we're very passionate about. The other part is when it comes to the interview process, like I said, 45 minutes or an hour, there's only so much you can learn.
Yep.
So for anybody who's interviewing, find out who in your network is at that company as well that can operate as a referral.
Great point.
Because,
Great point,
if Rishab was to be a candidate at Meta, I'd be able to reference to, hey, I worked with a guy for a couple of years. I know him from back then. I may not know perfect, and I wouldn't necessarily override the perspective of what those interviewers saw,
Right.
but it'd give me the opportunity to say, hey, this is how working with this person for a couple of years shows up, which is why really powerful to cultivate your network, build those friends and colleagues and cohorts. I've got folks that have been in Meta and then they've chosen to go a different place, and they ask me to give them, the reference and the referral on their next interview. Always happy to be part of helping folks grow wherever they're going. And that's, again, advice for folks that are looking for, how do I break in? Find who in your network is part of this, and then demonstrate your value with them, and do it in a high integrity way. So like they want to help you, as opposed to they feel like, oh, this guy's just, trying to use me as their in.
That's so
Love it.
nice. Yeah, love the answer. I mean, very descriptive. Thank you so much, Brian. Like, look into what you're applying. If I just have to summarize, and then also failure is not an end of the world. All the amazing people have failed. They've come back. Integrity and honesty is the best foot forward, and of course tap into your network, because network is gold.
What I took away: be authentic, no shortcuts to success, and have a strong network. I think for the network, even after a lot of people, when they're in college, they try to build a strong network to get a job. But once they get inside the job, they become a little complacent. But networking is a ongoing thing for your entire life. And if you do that, well, success is always going to belong you.
It's also fun.
It's also
keep
fun.
in mind, like I was looking forward to just saying hi and seeing you guys. This is great.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But like you get a chance to work with Zintel, and so it's just one of those people that you get to meet those characters. They're brilliant. You get to learn more from
100%.
them, and whether or not they're part of what happens next in your career, like it's an obvious joy and benefit of being able to be like,
That's
oh yeah, I
true.
worked with that guy. And it's amazing when you then cross paths with somebody else, like, oh yeah, I worked with them too.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You have that instant bond, and it's even that much more magical.
That's
Agree.
beautiful.
Completely agree. All right, let's talk about culture, Brian. A lot of people, our audience, they are very enthusiastic to learn from a leader like you. How do you build a culture which is, healthy, thriving, and person fresh out of college or a senior can actually, come in that culture and not only survive but thrive and grow into whatever they want to be, right? And would love to understand from you also, like, is there something specific you focus on, and how does that align with overall Meta's values and core values that Meta has? So would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is one where early in my career, it was at a time when culture wasn't necessarily considered a part of the job. You just survived wherever you were. And so it's fascinating how that evolved to become a hindrance. So honestly, at Microsoft, I tell the story that when Satya took over, it opened the door for me to interview 100 new people that I would not have been able to interview the year before, just because his presence changed the culture of the company. It changed the perspective of other folks. And you can, again, going back to my data love, you can look at the data of how many candidates were choosing from top colleges to consider Microsoft on their list of places that they wanted to interview. The year before Satya took over to the couple of years after, it was fascinating how it suddenly became interesting again. And you could potentially credit part of that to the technology and some of the innovations that were going differently in that time. But it's one of those where I look at it as the change in the culture gave me permission to meet people I would not have otherwise met. So as a company, it just matters. And it mattered the way that Satya changed it. I think at Meta, it's been part of the founding culture forever. You can say, move fast and break things was kind of the starting point, which was essentially you want to get out there and be present to your customer, add value, get that first mover advantage.
Right.
But it's also one that's, like I said, the mission today is how do we connect the world? And it does require that we have to have the ability to connect internally before we can actually have with integrity reach our customers.
Absolutely.
So from a leadership perspective, I think there's the stuff that you just write on the walls and you have posters. Does that have meaning and impact? It really doesn't. And this really hit home for me when what are the people and culture topics that we need to be talking about as a team before we talk about anything else that's on the agenda. There's 100 things that are a priority from the business, 100 things that are getting complained about. There's something that's on fire somewhere in the world and we need to figure it out.
Absolutely.
But we start talking about the people and the culture. And it's not necessarily to say let's recite a poster slang or something like that. It's more emphatic about what's impacting an individual or what's impacting the team's ability to collaborate effectively across boundaries. It's that's the process as opposed to necessarily the philosophy or the slang or the phrases that might make it more simplistic. But that's the part where it's been really meaningful, where Satya opened doors, Amy role modeled a behavior that then said, this is an expectation for leadership. And then now I feel the accountability to make sure we are building the culture that we want. As far as focus, I think that the two things that I'm focused on is inclusion. It's very easy to talk about diversity and inclusion, and I think that the part that I prioritize is the inclusion part. It's one thing to have, a very amazing, diverse set of individuals, but if they're just there but not participating, what difference does that make? It's also, the diversity of opinions. If you have a groupthink and the mindset is starting to become homogenous and you don't actually have, I call it the kicking and screaming competency. If you don't have people that are actively disagreeing, even if it's just to do the devil's advocacy part of it, you are potentially coming into, lack of interesting thoughts or people that are unwilling to speak up because it seems like the herd's going on location and they don't want to stand out. So that's the part where I try to emphasize for the team, okay, are we hearing other people's voices? Don't just do it because I said it and I have a bigger title than somebody else. We actually want to have, we call it the 3 C's. We want to have the courage, the conviction, and the open-mindedness, the compassion to be able to then make decisions on what are the actual right investments to make. So the idea there is you have to have the conviction of your idea.
Okay.
So study it, understand the data, be able to defend it. Then you have to have the courage to speak up about it.
Absolutely.
And then lastly, you have to have that compassion or that open mind to be willing to hear other people who present you with new information and be willing to step down from, defensiveness of just saying my idea, win or lose, and instead say, oh, that's actually a really good point. I hadn't thought about that. So when I talk about, the focus part, it's the inclusion part, and then it's this concept of what you might call the growth mindset part, which I hate using the buzzwords, but that is what I took away from the growth mindset conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. Fab.
One thing I have to say for sure is that, I think that people in my generation and the Gen Zs, we sort of take culture for granted that this should exist for always. And hearing from you, if you go a few years back, culture was not a thing. You have to just make do and wherever you are, just sort of suck it up and just do your job.
That's
right?
so true.
And I think I've experienced that firsthand. What you just said. I don't think if you remember this, but back in 2018, early in 2018, I got an opportunity as a very early in career PM. I was PM1 to present in front of engineering directors and the VP at that time, right? And I remember saying something like a KR, and there was this engineering director or engineering manager who was cutting me off, and Brian actually stepped in and he's like, let him complete his thought, and let hear him out first. And then at that time, I still remember that it's been 6 years, and somebody actually stepping up and actually fighting for me and say just allowing me to speak at that time. I mean, at that point, I really don't care if I'm right or wrong, but I need an opportunity to speak so that I don't hold it back next time I have a thought. A lot of people, they get discouraged that, hey, what if I try to speak, this is going to shut me down. So it empowered me to be that person where I can do that. And then, thank you for that.
I can tell you how much I love hearing that. It's one of those things where as you grow in your career, you discover your greatest happiness is the success of others. So hearing about how other people are learning or growing. But on that topic, this is where for each of you and for everybody in the audience, culture also is, what do you tolerate? And if you're willing to tolerate people, speaking over somebody else or trying to, put them in a corner or, not allowing for other perspectives to be heard, whatever those negative behaviors are, if you tolerate it, then that is your culture. And that's a question for each of us from no matter what level in the organization we are. Maybe you don't feel comfortable challenging it in the room, but talk to somebody that you trust who's maybe a little bit more senior, either in level or in time in the company. So you can ask them to advocate for, hey, if we tolerate this, this is the culture we're building. Versus, if we see something that's wrong and we're willing to actually talk about it. This is one of the things where I'm incredibly blessed with the people that I get to work with, because one of my current VPs, his name's Matt, he's very passionate about reminding the organization, we're here to, solve this problem. We're here to build long-term solutions for our long-term business outcome. We're building long-term organizations and we're building long-term careers. And he reminds us all, it's critical for each of us to make sure that when you deliver, difficult feedback, you do it in a compassionate way. So it's one of those things that we truly value. And he reminds us every time we get together in these large group forums, okay, it's really critical that we do hear this feedback and deliver it in a kind way. And so just that combination makes it possible, just by him as a role model, giving us the opportunity to say, Matt, you're full of it. And maybe that's not the most kind way for me to deliver it, but it gives us that opportunity for, us to criticize and do it in a deliberately helpful way, as opposed to like you're trying to get a shot in on somebody.
Absolutely.
I also, just one last thing before you ask me. I know you want to ask it. I think I love the fact that you said set an example. And I think when you did that in the setting where there were like 50 plus people, you actually set an example, right? So at that time, not only me who was like early in career, but the person who was like sort of interrupting me understood that this is not how things are done in this team, and everybody gets an equal opportunity regardless of the title, position, or the number of years of experience that they have. So I think that's a really tangible example of setting an example.
Leaders should always set an example, because now working in Microsoft through various teams, interacting with various teams, I feel if a leader is doing something right or wrong, you can actually see other people like deep down in their org doing the same stuff.
That becomes a culture.
Exactly. Because that is how things are run, right? If you are too sweet in an org and you're just trying to be polite, whereas the others are just, walking all over you, you'll not get the job done. So I think if your leader is doing that, you also pick that up, right? So it is
100%.
prevalent everywhere in the world. So moving on to that, I think you slightly touched on this topic, Brian, which was failures, challenges, right? And over your career in tech for so long, definitely there would have been some failures, some challenges. What were, according to you, it can be 1, it can be 2, it can be 3 max. What were your biggest challenges or setbacks, and how did you overcome it? And this is for everyone out there, because I know people are watching all over the world. There are times where you hit rock bottom and you feel like this is the end of the world. You know what? If I lost that job interview, if I'm, so many people were laid off. If I got laid off and I'm not able to find a job, I am not good enough. But I feel each one of us have gone through that. But it'll be great if you share your experience.
Yeah, I think the hardest ones always do involve, impact people's careers. Like that's the hardest part. So, sometimes when you're in a manager role and you've got somebody who's, not in their right role, it can be really hard to give them that feedback and talk through, okay, this is not the right role that's fitting for you. And that can be really, really hard. I don't want to pretend like there's any magical, how do you do that right? There just isn't. I know that for me, some of the bigger challenges have been, doing the startups. you oftentimes have euphoric highs. When we actually raised all that money, it was amazing as a company.
Yep.
Yeah.
But then there was the moment at which the shine comes off and, you know, the product market fit starts to struggle. And we did go through really significant layoffs. And, you know, the hard part of that was at one point there were rumors that were being written about our company before our people inside the company were aware. And it was really, really painful. So, you know I was responsible for our Seattle office. I had a team that was based primarily in Seattle, but also in Mountain View in California. And for them to be hearing these rumors in a way that impacted their careers, instead of being able to come from me with, you know, real, honest, here's what's actually happening, as opposed to these rumors that are being written about in the press, that was really hard for the team and really hard for me.
Right.
One of the things that we wound up doing is we just said, all right, drinks are on me. We're just going to go to a local restaurant bar and just talk, like just be honest. Because at that point, I didn't have, you know, the full information about being able to say, this is what I do know, because I didn't have the facts about what was changing. But it was one of those places where, you know, not trying to BS your way through something, being very honest and transparent with the team. This is what's happening. This is why I can understand why an article would be written. It's not true yet. It turned out that it wasn't fully true, but it was on the right trajectory, that we did have to go through significant layoffs. So that's never easy. It's always a challenge. The one part that I feel good about that, I'm still in touch with those folks.
Great.
We do a
That's awesome.
get together, and honestly, we
Nice.
just got together about a month and a half ago.
Oh, that's nice.
So being able to still have those types of relationships, it shows like you can't be a leader if you don't have those types of connections and you don't follow other leaders or develop followership.
Absolutely.
So I feel pretty honored that those folks trusted me to be part of that with them. And then just personally for me, I think there was the, you know, if you skip past the layoff, which is super traumatic, and you just go to like, a lot of folks that are in your audience are going to have the experience of just really, really hard projects. And the nickname that we had at Microsoft was hard marches or death marches, where a hard march is, this is going to be hard, but we can see where the light is at the end of the tunnel, and we know that it's not an oncoming train. We know that it's actually like there's a finish line. It's going to be really, really hard while we get through this. And while we were building Xbox One back in 2012 and 2013, it was kind of famous that David Treadwell would have to make these speeches about it's hard and it's going to get harder and you're going to have to work through this. And it was kind of funny that he would make those speeches to try to get the group lined up and motivated. But it actually worked because it was honest about, this is not the easy part of the job and the career that you've signed up for.
Yeah.
And we will actually get to the finish line, and we are here with you. And I remember when we then got from, you know, January to we had to ship. We were shipping the product in November of 2013. And there was not a choice to not make that deadline because the competition in the market required us to ship or essentially get left behind. And I remember as we got close to the finish line, when Mark and Tread were able to stand up in front of the group and say, and this is like the 2 days before launch, he's like, as you all know, looking back 2 months ago, we had no privilege and permission to be able to actually ship this product. We were in not an okay state. It was so hard, but you people here, you worked through this and you're able to actually accomplish it. So we could actually ship the product and meet the deadline. And so that's the part where, you know, I think about my hardest and maybe my favorite year in tech. And it was that time because it was a hard march. It was really, really difficult, but those leaders showed up as it is going to be hard and it's going to be okay because we're going to get to the other side. And they supported the team generously and they helped us work through it.
That's great.
But it was evenings, weekends, hard versus
Right.
a death march, which is it's hard and that's just all that there is. And you're not actually aware, what does success look like? When do we actually, you know, make hard choices to trade off so you can actually get to a finish line, as opposed to you're unwilling to trade off your favorite feature and you're just going to keep on marching and you're just going to kill the soldiers along the journey. And that's a really critical thing for folks to be able to ask their leaders. Are we on a death march or are we just on a hard march?
Right.
Show me what success looks like. Show me that that's a light at the end of the tunnel. It's not just the oncoming train, which is tragedy for the next 6 or 12 months of my life.
Correct. Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I think
love the
we
analogy.
should develop this into a real hard march versus death march. It's going to do great, right? So this is really good insight. Yeah, let's talk about AI, right?
Oh, the hot topic.
The hot topic right now, the buzzword, everybody's like, into it right now. So I think one thing that keeps popping up, and I see it all over Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn is like, how is AI going to affect a job of a PM or an engineer day-to-day job? And on the flip side, how can AI make the job of an engineer PM better, right? How can they optimize? What tools can they use, right? And what's the future looking like in this space? And like, people early in career or in their mid of the career, what can they do today to gain skills that might help them in the future of this AI ahead?
Yeah, I mean, if today you're not practicing with AI tools or learning more about how AI techniques are going to potentially advance your business area, you're falling behind. You just need to have that mindset of you need to be tech curious, tech capable, and constantly staying aware of how the tech trends are changing.
Absolutely.
You could have said, in many, many years past that any one of the trends that we've gone through from, PC in every home to, ubiquitous search to the launch of the internet to mobile phones, all of those things, you could have said, maybe it's a fad, maybe it's not, maybe it's big, maybe you don't understand. I think we've now reached that point of credibility with technology that you have to understand, AI is going to be big. It's going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
It's the easiest thing to say.
Absolutely.
What does it mean for us? So I like how you phrased part of your question there, which was, how can you embrace it and how can you use it to make you better as opposed to the fear of displacement?
True.
It's true to have the fear of displacement because it's not that, an AI robot or whatever is going to replace you necessarily. But if you are not keeping pace with what you can take advantage of with AI to make you more effective and more productive, then you are going to fall behind.
Exactly.
And maybe that is the replacement. But the way that I look at it is parts of the stuff that we're doing with AI inside of Meta, I mean, some of it's visible in public, stuff that we get to ship with llama models and all that. I think that's fantastic. I think it's amazing. You look back at what was happening with LLMs when we had ChatGPT, and Meta chose to be very open instead of proprietary with our technology. And now we have a pretty strong developer community that's heavily embracing of, the llama model. I think that's fascinating that you now have developers that are using this technology as an asset to then build new products.
Right.
So that's the product model.
Yeah.
But then there's the personal model.
Exactly.
How are you using AI capabilities
opposed
to make you more productive, to make you more effective? And I can't necessarily share any of the secret sauce about stuff that's happening inside the company.
Yeah.
But it's fun, the opportunity that we have to leverage AI techniques to make us more productive.
Yeah.
I will share, we also use AI technology to be less productive. So one of the things that I love about Meta is we actually have a very fun internal culture where, memes win the day in so many different discussions and arguments. So our internal chat technology has deep integration with the ability to just meme each other and have fun with that. I'm doing a speech next week internally for the company, and myself and one of my co-presenters, we're just having fun with how we're going to present and have that part of it.
That's awesome.
But that's where it's fun to have, the techniques that are in this case making us less productive potentially, where, it's, make a funny meme that has these things and all that.
Right.
So that's a part where it's, not just you have to be focused only on the productivity, but also this is where it's also a part of the fun.
Exactly.
You have to have fun, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Good luck with the speech. I hope it goes well. Yeah, but I love the points of how you have to embrace, and people or even businesses who are not adopting or looking into AI are and will fall behind. So this is I like the way you put it, that at some point PCs, internet, mobile phones were thought of as like, oh, this is like a fad that's going to go away. But AI has reached that point, the threshold where everybody's like, we need to have this in our business. We need to have this in our day-to-day lives, whatever PM or data engineer, whatever you are. And you have to, at this point, embrace it to move forward and have it as a skill in your back pocket to use it in interviews or a day-to-day job. So folks listening, there are so many resources out there. We will have some links to some useful resources in the comment section. So please go use them. And just start embracing AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think as we are nearing towards the end of today's interview, I think the second last question, because the last question is the spicy or rapid fire round. So the second last question is, what advice will you give to our viewers or anybody listening all over the world What are the tools, resources? And this is one question we ask all leaders in tech. What can they tap into? There are so many free courses, and this is something that Rishab and I, we constantly get on LinkedIn too. What are the certification courses, tools that or books that people should start reading when they are coming into big tech? And it can be engineering, product management, anything. But what is your top favorites?
I mean, that's a list that changes for me constantly. It's one of those things where I tell folks what I'm most recently reading or listening to. I find podcasts is one of my largest forms of consumption, because that's where you get super relevant recent information that can be very influential. But when it comes to books, I do tell people, find the lesson of the book as opposed to the religion of the book. So one of the first books that I got from a management perspective was called First Break All the Rules. And I don't remember everything about the book. I couldn't tell you anything necessarily about the book other than the lesson that I took, which was, how do you focus on amplifying people's strengths instead of giving them feedback about their weaknesses? There's something where you want to make sure weaknesses are not blind spots. So being able to talk about, hey, you've got a weakness or an area of development to focus on around X or Y or Z. Just be aware of that. It's not necessarily hindering you today, but just be aware that that's something that could cause an issue for you. Maybe it's the way that you think that you're, sharing information with somebody else, but they may take it as you being, pedantic, or you being over pressuring on them or something like that. So the fact that you're aware of that can then make it so you can now figure out, okay, how can I adapt or learn or improve? But amplifying your strengths is, did you know how good you are at telling a story and getting other people to buy into the direction that you're going? You should really emphasize your strength and develop that. So when I look at that book, it's not the fact that the book is brilliant, it's the fact that there's a lesson that I can then pull from there. And that's the part where I try to encourage folks, build a toolbox. I was told early, build your toolbox. And your toolbox should have, okay, what lesson did you pull from a book? Who is a person that is giving you those pieces of advice and that guidance that's actually helping you get smarter and better? I remember when the Masters of Scale podcast came out, and they had Zuck on there talking about, if your first product isn't an embarrassment, you waited too long. Like you have to be that level. And there's another person who was on there and said, the power of no. Pitching to startup investors and getting told no 900 some odd times before getting a yes, and the development of their success in their career from there. Those are the parts that are massively more meaningful than, here's the one book to go read. Unfortunately, that does mean that it's more work. The fun part about it is it's actually, to me, it's enjoyable because when you're listening to podcasts like this one, or you're getting the opportunity to, what are some of the more recent ones? I don't know if your audience listens to Stratechery, but that's...
He's a big fan.
Ben Thompson.
Absolutely.
Every morning I listen to that. Every morning. Yes.
So the fascinating thing is that he's worked at Microsoft. He's got a fantastic opportunity. He lives in Taiwan. All the cool stuff that he's done from a life perspective.
Right.
And then, the things that's fascinating is when Meta rebranded Facebook to Meta, he had the interview with Zuck. When we did the rollout of the Orion glasses, he had the conversation with Boz, who's our chief technical officer. So
I heard that.
It's just amazing. He's got that connection in the industry. But the fun part is like he also brings in other people like Eric Seifert from Mobile Dev Memo, and being able to learn, from multiple brilliant people talking about how the industry is moving, talking about the trends that they're observing. So it is more work for your audience to, not just read the book, because there isn't the book, but to collect these really fascinating places that they can learn. And I love, I listen to music and have fun and all that, but, going for a jog or driving in traffic or whatever and being able to turn on a podcast, you get a ton out of that. So it's an amazing tool to tap into. So like I said, build your toolbox and make sure you've got great podcasts in there. Make sure you get a couple of books. But I also strongly encourage, find people that are actually dispensing knowledge. We have one guy at the company who's brilliant on technical problem solving. And the joke is Mark, and this is a different Mark, not that Mark, Mark Santinello, when he rocks around, impact's just falling out of his pockets because he's that smart. You can just follow him as he's walking and he doesn't even realize how brilliant he is because he's just leaving those crumbs that other people can then grab and run and make more impact from. So find people like that. Inside of Meta, Chris Cox and Andrew Bosworth post internally, and this is one of those fascinating things, just by working inside of Meta, you get access to some of these brilliant topical things that they've shared recently or over the long term, Mark runs a weekly Q&A where we actually get to hear from him as a leadership perspective,
Right.
what's happening and what's meaningful for the business. So like I said, build a toolbox
I like
where
that.
you got a couple of
Toolbox.
lessons from books,
Mhm.
you've got your podcast, and then follow those brilliant people that you then get to like squeeze them dry and take advantage of all of their brilliance. That's the fun part.
Yeah.
Okay. I
So-
let me just say one thing.
Yeah.
I love your articulation skills. Okay,
Mm.
some of the things that you said, I'm just memorizing it, guys, over here.
Ah.
Like lessons from a book. Every time we have asked this question to so many people, and
Yep.
Rishab can totally agree with that. Nobody has said like, everybody says read this book, read that book, and even we know we have read like 500 plus books now. Growing up in India, also we read a lot. We don't remember everything in a book. What we
Absolutely.
remember are few pages, few chapters, few lessons that we apply in our life, or we always remember them in we are in the same situation, right?
Absolutely.
I love that. And then the podcast part. We both, like, whenever we are working out, it's a thing. We always text each other, oh, I listened to this episode. Like yesterday, I forwarded him this episode from Lenny's podcast
Yeah.
on Notebook LM, and I'm like, you should listen to this
love it.
because
Yeah.
they are coming for us. They are coming for us, like, because Notebook LM is taking the podcast game ahead, and like they're so good.
Yeah,
If
I
you
have
guys
a-
have not checked it
I have
out,
a story about that actually. You know what? You actually got me into listening to a
Uh-oh.
podcast
Oh, yes.
while working out, while jogging. We used to have like monthly one-to-ones back in 2017, 2018. And then Brian and I used to talk about, like, for example, the product I was working on. How do I get a good rating or get good reviews about this product, for instance, right? So he would tell me that, hey, I listened to a podcast about this Airbnb rating.
The 5-star
What's a
ratings.
5-star rating?
Yes.
What's a you know you
What's
have
a
that
10-star
what's
rating?
a 10-star rating?
Absolutely.
You have if a person is into parasailing, there's a parasailing guide that you can go and do it over here. So you should tell me about that. And then there was one discussion we had about mentorship as well. And then there's another story you told me about the podcast about mentorship, about this guy working in real estate. I forgot the whole story, but you see, you sort of like used to tell me all these anecdotes and all these tales, and I'm like, wow, I gotta listen to all these podcasts. This is fabulous. And then you suggested me a couple of podcasts as well at that time, and then slowly I started, listening to them, and I just got hooked on to it, and I just
Wow.
and that's how I told you that you should start listening to it, right?
so it flowed. Like,
it
you know,
did,
it
it
started
did.
See,
with you.
the fun part is the way that you described that podcast that you listened. When I was in college, I got the opportunity to go to essentially a how to be a gentleman school, like,
Okay.
eat with the proper etiquette and all that other
Right,
fun
right.
We
stuff.
got that in MBA
MBA as
too.
well.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's fascinating is there's a proper way to introduce people to other people. You don't just say, hey, this is Rishab, hey, this is Ankita. You actually have, hey, did you know Rishab? I really want you to meet him because he's really good at X or Y or Z. So you give them the topic so that they can now talk to each other instead of just introing the people and they then
yeah.
have to cold start. You give them a
Yeah.
warm handoff. Same thing with this technology and same thing with this mentor idea or with the book idea or the podcast idea. You should read this book because you'll hear about blah, blah, blah. Like
Love
making
it.
that connection.
Yeah.
That's where, like, anybody who recommends a book for him, I'm like, why? And that's so much fun to hear them say, oh, I loved it because. And
Yeah.
then now you're seeking that lesson in the book.
Exactly.
It makes it so much more fun.
Yeah, I mean,
That is so beautiful.
it's been like more than 6-7 years, and I still remember that podcast or
Oh
the
my God, that was a good
Airbnb rating. I still
Yep.
because the way you described it and the way it was fitting into my day-to-day job
Exactly.
was so relevant that it just it stuck.
Yeah.
It's just stayed, right? And then that forced me to get more knowledge about different stuff, just like you told me about this rating thing. How do I get more knowledge about this area, or like how do I get more learnings about these anecdotes? So that just got me into this podcast thing, and that's a warm handoff, like you just
Love it.
talked about.
Yeah.
So
Love it.
And then he used
That's-
to come home and ask me questions.
That's
like, what
awesome.
do you think about this? And then if I couldn't answer, then he was like, oh, I heard this podcast and this said this. So, I mean, knowledge flows,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And
Right,
that's
yeah.
so important.
and I think it grows even more if you teach it to somebody else, right?
Correct.
That's how you master it, right? So I think
yes.
I love the way you said that.
right.
That's one of those things where there's the journey of your career where you start as like an apprentice, a journeyman, a master, and then an expert. And the difference when you go, expert then master. The difference between an expert and a master, expert can do it at the expert level. A master can teach at that
Correct.
expert level. And so that's the
Exactly.
part where when you truly are mastering your capability, you're able to then teach somebody. So it's really meaningful to hear,
Yes.
something that we talked about so long ago, like it's actually stuck and it's been impactful.
And
That's awesome.
it was very impactful. Like I mean, we are literally hosting a podcast
Yeah.
because of the
The
reason we
podcast.
got into podcast, right? So look at the irony.
I love it.
But all right, let's go into our last round.
The spicy.
The rapid fire or the
fire.
lightning round. it's usually we'll ask you a question and you have to tell whatever pops up in your mind, and it should be like a little bit spontaneous, right? So,
Okay, we'll see.
so the first question, right? What is the book you recommend the most to your friends or peers or people who know?
So maybe the most
Yeah.
has been The Coddling of the American Mind. Nothing new to tech.
Okay.
Okay.
And you can find it by going to thecoddling.com if I'm not mistaken. But this is where there's a fascinating set of lessons in there. And I think kind of an attachment onto that is a recent book. It's called Blind Spots by Dr. Marty McCary. He's a doctor at Johns Hopkins. And this book just talks about this fascinating delta between what is wisdom and what is opinion. Because the idea in Blind Spots is there's a lot of things in the medical industry that are opinions that became
Interesting.
dogma
Yeah.
as opposed to it actually was scientific. Like, I don't want to go too far into it because a lot of people can then make assumptions about the biases and all that, because unfortunately there's a ton of bias in the world. But the interesting thing is, the peanut allergy question is talked about and addressed in that book. And the concept of, is heart disease caused by fat in the food you consume? And then a scientist, a doctor, talks about, well, here's what the studies actually say. And there's an awful lot in this book where, I talked to my wife about it and she's like, oh no, I know that. And here's why. And here's how it's affecting me in my life.
Oh, wow.
Fascinating. And that's where, most recent book is Blind Spots. Probably the most recommended has been The Coddling of the American Mind.
Lovely. We will have the links to these
Yeah.
books in
We will
the
link the books.
comment section, folks, so that you can go and check it out.
What's the best career advice that you have ever received?
Oh, interesting.
I think that there might be two.
Okay.
One is the question of why. It's really easy for us to get into the black and white of what are we going to go do. So from a product management perspective, product managers are accountable to define what is the product's outcome, and the engineers are accountable to develop how are we going to build that. So what's meaningful for our customers? What is the dimensions of the solution look like? What color is a button? Like, those are all the whats. The fascinating part is the why, because as soon as a product manager hands off to an engineering team the what design, the engineers are going to make 1,000 decisions off of that one set of inputs. And if all you give them is the what without giving them the why, they're going to make 1,000 decisions where 500 of them are going to be righteous because it's straightforward.
Yeah.
But on all those things that might be meaningful because they don't know the why, they might miss out. So this actually, I use it in mentoring sessions. I use it in all kinds of other conversations. I describe it as my brilliant colors or vibrant colors sermon or whatever. I have a bunch of these sermons that I give. And so that's the one where rather than drawing the black and white, draw the vibrant colors about why is this meaningful to our customers. So that's one. The second one would be long-term thinking. It's so easy to get focused on what's happening tomorrow, the next week, the week after that, just all of the short-term deadlines because they're right there. And it gives us the ability to accomplish something because it's happening now. Long-term thinking gives you that opportunity to say, okay, these are contributing to the vision and the direction that we want to get to.
Absolutely.
So those are two things that have really stuck with me is, the power of why. So don't be a jerk about saying why, like a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, but why is a descriptive permission. You have the permission to tell your engineers and your teammates, here's why we're building what we're describing. And then talk about what long-term looks like as opposed to just the next milestone.
Love
I think
it.
having the answer to the why, a very strong answer to the why, is like the core of, I feel, the PM job, that you yourself should know and
Why
be
we're doing
convinced
this.
of why this needs to be built before you start convincing your team or the engineers or the designers that you have to work with.
Especially your most controversial ones, because it's really easy to talk about a different colored car
Yeah.
versus talking about an entirely different
Car.
kind of car.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
That's true.
What's your current favorite product? Can be anything, like an app or a
God.
physical product, whatever. You can choose.
I don't know if it's my favorite yet. So I kind of didn't drive over here today. So from the office to here, my car, I've just got a Tesla. And so I just got the full self-driving upgrade. I got driven over here by my car, and there's something amazing and incredibly stressful about giving control, sitting in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
But it was absolutely amazing that we're at this level of technology that this car that is driving to a location along a journey that I've never driven this exact route before to this exact location, and, kind of closing your eyes, not necessarily closing your eyes, but, giving control to the machine, to the AI, to actually do that commute for me. So I don't know if it's my favorite, but I'm absolutely
Loving it, right?
amazed by it because the amount of construction that's happening on the streets around here in Seattle,
yeah.
the interactions with human beings,
Mm-hmm.
choosing to jump in front of the car, like it's amazing that all the way over here, the car drove me instead of I drove myself. So I don't know if it's my favorite, but I'm literally like the halo effect of the most recent thing. Like, holy cow, that blew me away. Because my friends have told me about my brother has a Tesla, and he told me this full self-driving is really cool. Holy cow, I was blown away today. That was amazing.
That's interesting. They're also
we are living in the future, right?
Yeah.
Also, they just unveiled
announced
their
I know.
Their
robo-taxi.
Last night was
Yeah.
a big deal.
Yeah,
and the
that's a big hype
Robovan
thing.
or whatever. How
Yeah.
do you mispronounce Robovan?
which had to be released in like what, 2017, 2016?
2017 and then 2019 and 21, and finally
Yeah.
the prototype has come out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm excited to
I
see
am
other
too.
reviews. Yeah. Okay, what's your life's motto?
I don't know about a life motto. I think one that I talk about. So in Psalms 27:17, it says, "Iron sharpens iron."
Oh.
The reason why that's meaningful to me is, and the rest of the proverb talks about how, humans can help other people strengthen each other. I had a great conversation today over lunch with one of the smartest guys on my team. He's Patrick. His name's Patrick. He's just amazingly brilliant. And he had this fascinating conversation with another person who's just as smart and just as brilliant. And just the physics of watching two incredibly smart people, not necessarily agree on everything. I don't expect that we're going to agree on everything.
True.
But to have that opportunity to bring, a really smart piece of sharp iron against another really sharp piece of smart iron, and putting the two together, they both get smarter. So just the simple fact of our interactions where we disagree doesn't mean we should walk away disappointed or frustrated or irritated. It means, okay, my iron just got sharper today. And that's, it ties into Stephen Covey, the 7 habits of the highly effective and all that, where the 7th habit is sharpen the saw.
Right.
Yeah.
So the opportunity to just continuously say, okay, we disagree. One of us is potentially more right than the other,
Yeah.
but I'm not coming in this to be the winner of who's right. I'm coming into this to come out sharper. And that's that fun opportunity is, if you really embrace the idea that iron sharpens iron, you are going to enter into every conflict with the opportunity to get smarter as opposed to the opportunity to lose. So that's the part that I like to enjoy. I like to think about it myself. I like to put it into my kids. You never lose. You either win or you're learning something. So
Yeah.
that's the mentality that I try to
Love it.
embrace.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that on you.
Good luck. Yeah.
I'm going to use that as
Whenever
well.
we fight.
I'm going to use that as well.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. That can be applied anywhere in life.
I don't use
right?
that with my wife, just so you two know. She wins, I lose. That's the general story. Like, if that's the model you're looking for, that's the one. My kids can
Listen
tell
to
you
him
that.
For sure.
Absolutely. Happy wife, happy life, right? That's the thing.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Yeah. On that note, we come to the end of today's podcast. Thank you so much, Brian. I think this entire episode has just been phenomenal. We learned so much, right? Sitting here, getting your aura in, your entire knowledge. It's great to sit with a leader as phenomenal as you and think and see how you think, what's your life motto, to what you are reading, to what you're thinking about technology. And it was an honor. Like, I started
I
with that and I'm
appreciate that.
ending with that.
You're too
Yes.
kind.
I couldn't agree with you more. I thank you so much for, first of all, taking time out of your busy schedule and coming and meeting us and, sharing so much with our audience. And I'm pretty sure, we have learned so much. Our audience is going to learn a lot. And one last question I'm going to ask you is, like, Brian, if our audience wants to get in touch with you, how can they do that? Via LinkedIn?
Oh, yeah. It's kind of funny. I work at Meta, and yet I'm not that good on the socials. I am as simple as LinkedIn. Like,
Okay.
that's
I think LinkedIn
where
is
the
the
best
best channel.
opportunity is.
Yeah.
I also find it fascinating. Like, I've learned from people on LinkedIn about how to make Meta better as well.
Oh, yeah.
And then obviously there's the enjoyment of making connections in the industry, and you just can't get enough out of the opportunity there.
Yeah.
So yeah,
100%.
LinkedIn's the best.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. We'll
You-
link his LinkedIn below.
And that's the end of our podcast. Thank you, folks. Please subscribe, like, comment. That really helps us in bringing a guest like Brian Ellis, who shares amazing knowledge with us. So also, please let us know in the comments who would you next like us to bring in our podcast. Thank you so much for watching. Keep liking, keep sharing, and stay curious. Thank you.
Love it. Thanks, guys.